This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.
Hey media, we need a rewrite. I'm Erin Trafford, and this is The Fourth Draft. And welcome in. Erin Trafford here with you. This is The Fourth Draft, a production of Story Studio Network, the company where I happen to be the CEO and founder, and where we just happen to be super awesome at branded podcasts and all things media strategy and story strategy. And today's episode of The Fourth Draft, I'm going to go specifically niche on one particular tool in our kit that we need to talk about before we get too far into 2025. And the tool that I want to talk about is the almighty press release, okay? And I will preface all of this by saying that I am not anti-press release. I am not anti-press release, and you will never hear me say that I am anti-earned media. Never will you hear me say that. Well, okay, never say never, but I haven't said it yet. And where we are with the press release and earned media, though, and the reason why I want to do this short and snappy episode with you is that things have changed rapidly, and I want you to get the most out of your media strategy this year. And this is critical for, I would say, 65-70% of the organizations that we work with at Story Studio Network, and quite a few of the organizations that bring me in to help them unpack or untangle their media strategy. There's either one of two things happening. Either they're using press releases as a strategy and not a tool, or they're putting too much emphasis on the press release to do something that it's not designed to do. And the result of either of those missteps is that you are wasting time and energy, and you are not squeezing your story for all that it is worth in the market. So I just want to talk about this before we get too far down the rabbit hole of other things I want to talk about this season. This episode kind of stands out. So it's not really in the arc of things, but I'm the boss, and so we're going to do it. All right. So here's a whole basic premise of today is that the press release worked really, really well about 15 years ago. And when I used to be on the desk, I would say on an 8-hour, 10-hour shift or whatever it would be, I would probably get 30, maybe more press releases sent to me personally per day. Now, that is not including the releases that go out over the wire services, the releases that are using, CN Newswire or CP back in the day, stuff that comes across the AP, certainly the global stuff that goes through Reuters and all of those things. So there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can get a press release out, but the most effective way, and this has never changed, is to get something sent directly to the editor on the desk, the producer on the desk, or the reporter on the beat, right? So when that used to be me, honest to God, I would get, 20, 30 per day. Now, I want to set the playing field for us, because we know that in the last 15 years, a lot of ish has changed in the media industry, in particular in newsrooms. They are shrinking. They are under-resourced. They are changing because, we're seeing roles that exist in newsrooms now that never used to exist. We're seeing things like multimedia journalist. Hi, that's doublespeak for you're going to get paid the same, but you're going to have to do 5 times the work. Okay, so this is all sort of adding to this changing environment, the changing expectations, and the changing ability of that reporter or that beat producer, whoever it may be, to actually pay attention to you. They have a lot of shit on their plate. And 9 times out of 10, they're overworked. They have huge decision fatigue that sets in by about 10 a.m. if they're working a day shift. Okay. They have already made most of the decisions that they're capable of making for that day, unless breaking news happens and they happen to be a hard news reporter, in which case they're used to that shift and that pivot through the day. Things get dropped, things get buried if breaking news happens. That's a different discussion. But today I want to talk about this press release, okay? So why are press releases not working the way they used to? That is the context. Newsrooms have changed. But I also want to talk about the press release as a tool and why it is less effective now, regardless of the changing dynamic in the newsroom. Firstly, most of them that I see are completely impersonal, as in they are formulaic, they are templated, and therefore they are often ignored. I want you to think honestly about your own experience receiving things that feel generic. I don't know about you, but when I get a letter from, I don't know, like the president of RBC sent to me thanking me for my business or whatever it is, I don't read it. I know he didn't really write it. And I know it's the same exact thing that got sent to everybody else, just have my name at the top and my address. Okay? Formulaic. They are typically, when they're mass produced, mass sent, you write one and you send it everywhere. Journalists today, this is why that doesn't work, is that when it's generic, naturally you want to ignore it. And because now they're not sifting through 30 a day, statistics are showing that they're sifting through sometimes 100 or more per day because there are fewer journalists, there's fewer inventory or less inventory, fewer places to publish a story. They're getting more pitches. If your release looks generic and templated, it's going to be way harder to grab that journalist's attention. The news cycle is faster. Things are more crowded. When you don't stand out, you are not going to be heard, which leads me to the noise factor. So all of this contributes to another key reason why press releases aren't working. And it's that the world, as we have gotten more fractured and fragmented in the way that we consume our media, the noise factor has gone up. There is a whole lot of static out there that is contributing to that press release not standing out. And if you are using a template, if it is impersonal, if it is formulaic, if it doesn't come with the exact right resonance, you are just contributing to the noise. And it does not surprise me when clients come to me and say, well, we sent, 24 press releases last year. Our metric was to send one every 2 weeks, and we sent one every 2 weeks, and we didn't get anything from it. And then I look at it and I think, well, of course you didn't. This is noise. Nobody gives a shit about this. Why? Where is the who cares in any of this? Let's fix it. Which leads me to the fundamental shift you need to make when you're thinking about your press release. And I laugh because I think a few episodes back, I jokingly said, hey guys, the media is not your audience. Here's the exception. I will admit, there are mostly exceptions to every rule. Okay, the exception is with your press release. That is the exception to the media is not your audience, because the only job of that press release is to get the attention of that reporter, producer, or editor. That is the only job it has. And I will add, that does not mean that the job of the press release is to tell the whole story. And it is not the job of the press release to communicate the full depth of your values and of your brand. What it's supposed to do is pique the curiosity of that reporter or journalist or broadcaster so that they pick up the phone and they call you, or they fire you an email. Better yet, a text message. They want to know more. Help me get in touch with the source. That is the only job of that press release. So often I see a lot of organizations thinking that this press release, they'll agonize over adjectives, verbs, sentence structure, all that shit. I'm here to tell you stop, because honest to God, that journalist couldn't care less. If they're worth anything, they are worth their medal. They're not just regurgitating your press release. And if they are, we have another problem that I'll talk about later. But the job of that press release is to get that reporter excited, engaged, and curious so that they see the value in asking more questions. That is it. That is it. Press releases are not bad. They're actually really, really good. But they are not enough anymore in the way they used to be. That formulaic cookie cutter, spray and pray approach to your press release is not going to work. Today's media needs more depth. Today's media needs more personalization, just like everything else in your media strategy. But in this case, it's personalization to the person receiving that information and that communication, which is the journalist. It needs to resonate with them before anybody else. So if you are like, oh no, we need to reevaluate how we're handling our press releases, here's a couple tips. Now, this isn't going to be exhaustive. This is a podcast episode. I'm only giving you like 20 minutes of high level advice here, but it's good advice. So consider it, please. I want you to lead with a story. And here's how to lead with a story. Your new initiative, your store opening, your ribbon cutting, not a story. Okay? It is not a narrative. It is not something worthy of covering. I want you to stop thinking about what you want to say. And I want you to start thinking about what your audience needs to hear. The first audience of that press release being the journalist. And the secondary audience who you also want to reach is that journalist's audience. Your press release is the bridge. It's the suspension bridge that lets you hop from where you are to that journalist and to the audience. You need to make it matter on multiple levels. So your store opening or your quarterly results or the fact that you won a competition, not a story. So instead of doing that, what I want you to think about is crafting a narrative and showing a narrative that showcases the problem that you're solving for that audience, the journalist and the journalist's audience. And then I want you to show how you've created impact. And here's the beautiful part about this. You don't actually need a press release template to do that. You can do that in a personalized email to the right reporter. Journalists will appreciate you sending them 3 or 4 sentences in an email, personalized, tailored, because you've taken the time to build the relationship with that journalist. You know the beat that they're running. You know the last few stories that they've written. You know what they care about and what they need and when they need it. And you therefore understand what their audience cares about and what they need and when they need it. And your press release has all of a sudden taken on a whole new Flavor Flav, because now you can say, hey, Eddie, listen, this thing happened and we've managed to solve this massive problem. And this is the impact we're looking at. Do you have any desire to chat further about this or any questions you'd like to ask? Incept in the journalist that they get to ask you questions. Don't just cut them off at the knees and say, for more information, contact our corporate communications office. No, not going to work anymore. No journalist is going to call a 1-800 number. No, they won't. Unless they're trying to get like that recording of the Butterball turkey 1-800 number because they're running a turkey story on Thanksgiving and it's a slow news day. That's the only time I can honestly remember that I called a 1-800 number when I was a reporter. And it was simply just to get a recording of the answering service. The best way to get noticed is not to broadcast louder with your press release. It's actually by crafting a story and making a legitimate connection. The other thing that I will say in this day and age is you got to make it easy. You got to make it easy for the journalist and easy for the audience. And we've talked about this. I think this might have been episode 2. But the next thing you need to think about is how to make this measurable. Because for so long, what we were able to measure is how many times your press releases got picked up by the media, right? How many times your story got put in the paper, put on TV, on the morning show, on whatever, right? You were able to calculate that. What we have seen, especially since COVID hit, is that where you might have used to have, you might used to have had a 70% uptake. I mean, that wasn't uncommon. Depending on what industry you were in, for every 10 press releases you sent, you might have gotten a mention somewhere 70% of the time. Now we're seeing those numbers shrink way down to, 20, 15, even 10%, sometimes 0. Sometimes folks are getting no uptake where they used to get huge uptake. It's a problem. And it all comes back to this whole idea of there's not enough inventory. The journalists have too much turnover. Maybe you've lost some key relationships. All of those things are contributing to that degradation of your ability to get the earned media. So how do you make it easy is you actually anchor it and root it in your owned media. Because now at least, if and when you do get that sliver of coverage, you were able to quantify what that meant for your brand beyond simply saying we got a sliver of coverage. It's not worth the same that it was worth before. So here's what I mean by that. You're in the background because you've been able to simplify your press release and because you've been able to simplify how you are looking at earned media in the context of your grander media strategy. You're now able to leverage more time and effort to create content and to create narratives that your brand and organization owns. You are using that as the dangling carrot for your earned media so that when that journalist knocks on your door, you can give them the story of the day and then also send them back to this owned media for context, which they will then do likely for their audience. Your owned narrative becomes part of their story. I'm on a morning show. I'm talking about the issue of the day, but I'm also plugging the fact that we did a documentary on it. I'm on, in the paper. We're talking about a research report. I'm telling folks where they can find that research report on our website. You're doing your best to create a thread from the earned media that is not very measurable back to an owned resource that is highly measurable. Okay, this is your new approach to using the press release. Notice that none of this is about how to write a hooky or press release. This is all about what is the job of that press release and really reinforcing that. The job is simply to get the attention of that reporter. So what do you need now in order to make all of this work? There's a few tools that you can use to bolster the effectiveness of your press release. And none of these is exhaustive and none of these is necessary, but they're all kind of things to consider. You might want to consider evaluating and auditing how you're showing up on social media. It could be one of the reasons why your press release strategy is falling flat. And this is why. Journalists are getting younger. They're getting younger, and that means that they are on TikTok. That means they are on Instagram. It means they are consuming copious amounts of YouTube. It means that they are heavy, heavy, heavy podcast listeners. And if they get something from you that crosses their desk, you bet your bottom dollar that the first thing that they're naturally going to be inclined to do is check you out on social media. They want to see if you walk the walk and talk the talk. And if you've got nothing there, again, back to the whole owned media. Now, social media is not owned media. It's rented media. But it's better than nothing. They want to make sure that you are who you say you are and there's something there for them to fall back on. So there could be a play here for you to evaluate how you're showing up there. Might be why your press releases aren't getting picked up. The other thing I want you to think about energetically is that journalist is a collaborator with you. A lot of the times they don't say it, but I'm extremely intuitive in the work that I do. I can feel it, that there is still a fear of the reporter. And if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear. I'll say that. No reporter wakes up in the morning and says, I'm gonna get ya. I really don't think so. It really doesn't happen. That's not our job. That is not the job of the reporter, is not to do gotchaism and to get you between a rock and a hard place. That is not what they want to do. So you got to stop thinking about them as an adversary or as somebody to break or as somebody to own. You got to start thinking about them as a collaborator because you both actually have similar jobs. Your job is to tell great stories to the right people at the right time in order to cultivate mattering and in order to cultivate action, advocacy, and depth of connection. You're just coming at it from different sides. Okay. So I want you to start thinking about them as collaborators and not adversaries. And then the last thing is kind of something that I reinforced is where you want to drive a metric using your earned media back to something owned so that you can start to measure your results over time. Journalists also love that kind of stuff. So if you can give them data-driven storytelling, so maybe you did win an award and you want that to be part of the story, can you back that up with data-driven storytelling that emphasizes the impact? Make it compelling and make it contextual and make it data-driven. And if you're able to pair your stats with human stories to make it even more relatable, then you likely have a perfect storm. So I want to end this episode by saying I probably won't do this episode again because I don't think much more of this needs to be said. We may reference it throughout the season, but I really needed to get this off my chest because I want to see you be more innovative with this in 2025. I think it's going to be critical. Your press release is not the story. It really is just the starting point. Just the starting point. All it's designed to do is pique curiosity. Press releases are not obsolete, but relying on them is. The landscape demands personalization, story-driven outreach that is supported by strong, compelling, owned media. And if this has piqued your curiosity and this is something that you want to dig into, couple invitations for you. Number one, I've said this season, I'm taking a very small handful of one-to-one consulting clients in 2025. I'm talking like 4 or 5 max. So I don't know if when you're listening to this, I'm tapped out already, but let's have a chat. Let's figure out how to squeeze you in and your organization. We can work together for a quarter. Let's unpack it and reestablish this new media strategy together. The other option you have, if you have no owned media, but you know you've got a great story and a really compelling brand that has something to say, it could be time for you to jump into owned media in a really, really meaningful way. And that's what we can help you with at Story Studio Network. So information on all of that, how to get in touch with me for a call, check out what we do at Story Studio Network, all of that is in the show notes. Super simple. All right. Next episode, I want to tackle the R word. We're going to talk about ROI and revenue and how to actually measure. Do you have a revenue problem? Do you have a content problem? How do we tie those two things together? Juicy. I'm Erin Trafford. This is The Fourth Draft. Thank you so much for listening.
This is Story Studio Network.